Toward the end of his life, the poet Allen Ginsberg frequently recounted to friends a recurring dream in which the poet T.S. Eliot was reciting to Ginsberg Ginsberg's own verse. In a way, it is a very beautiful dream, for it marks a kind of making peace with the poet who had always been there in the periphery for Ginsberg. After all, when Ginsberg was a student at Columbia University in the 1940s, new criticism was in its ascendancy, and T.S. Eliot was thought of as not only a great poet, but as the poet, the author of The Wasteland, the great poem of the century that, in terms so emotionally intimate and at the same time socially and psychologically aware, had explored the particular griefs and traumas of 1922 in such vivid language. Paralysis in the face of love for those wounded by the war and wounded by a sense of, I can connect nothing with nothing. You gave me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me the hyacinth girl. Yet when you came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing looking into the heart of light. The silence, O l'air, das Meer, was empty and forsaken is the sea. And so it's a poem about paralysis in the face of love, and about the wounding from war, and about everyone being a refugee, and about being unable to connect the pieces of life anymore. I can connect nothing with nothing. I know only a heap of broken images. And so at Columbia, here was T.S. Eliot sort of lording over everything in the sense of poetic esteem, and Ginsberg burning for an ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night, which of course is a line from his Howl, but he always wanted more, a deeper spiritual union, communion, interfusion, the sense of further, which becomes a creed for the beats as well. No more of this 1950s conformity and complacency and hypocrisy. I am an angel-headed hipster burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. And just as in his life as a poet and a person, Ginsberg would move increasingly towards the spiritual, towards the performative, towards the musical, so Eliot's way out of the wasteland was the vastly spiritual and mystical four quartets. But those two poems, The Wasteland in 1922 and Howl in 1955, are sort of strange twins in a permanent dance of expression of both personal despair and social malaise, but also a transfiguring of that despair into song, into the music of verse. And it's instructive to think that in spite of the hundreds of books about the wasteland, or the dozens of books about Ginsberg and Howl, the smartest lines I ever heard about the wasteland were by Virginia Woolf, who in 1921, a year before the poem was published in the Dial or the Criterion, which was Eliot's journal, had Eliot come over, and she says, Tom visited us today and sang us his new poem. He sang and rhythmed and rhymed, and you get a sense of this presence of a poem turning into music in Virginia Woolf's heart and ears, and she calls it a beautiful poem. Well, a beautiful poem and singing it to us isn't exactly what we think of when we think of hearing Eliot reading April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire as an older man, where he gives the poem a very subdued performance. But sing it is what he did to the Wolves. And there are lines in the poem, the river sweats oil and tar. The barges drift with the turning tide. Red sails wide to leeward swing on the heavy spar. The barges drift, drifting logs down Greenwich Reach, past the Isle of Dogs. Waiala la, trams and dusty trees. Highbury bore me, Richmond and Kew undid me. By Richmond I raised my knees supine on the floor of a narrow canoe. And when you hear something like Waiala la in a section of the poem about a river, it suddenly dissolves into pure sound sense in this musical transforming world. And Eliot's poem is full of things like that. And so is Allen Ginsberg's. And there is a very real sense in which the whole of Howl is a musical performance with cadences and rhythms that feel right out of Old Testament or prophetic writing. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. And as dense and beautiful as it is in terms of meaning, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo being something like a creed for the beats, that desire for further union and deeper communion, for spiritual intensity in life, for a sense of the real, a sense of the substantial, opposed to some sort of existential crisis of non-being. Being is what they wanted, beat and being. And you see at various points towards the poem, it rises up in sound sense towards something like an incantation. He, madman, bum, and angel, beat in time, unknown, yet putting down here what might be left to say in time, come after death, and rose reincarnate in the ghostly clothes of jazz. And jazz is everywhere there, of jazz in the gold horn shadow of the band, and blew the suffering of America's naked mind for love into an Ali, Ali, Lama, Lama, Sabachthani saxophone cry that shivered the cities down to the last radio, with the absolute heart of the poem butchered out of their own bodies. Good to eat 1,000 years. And that good to eat 1,000 years and butchered out of the body might sound like a little bit morbid, but in fact, the act of eating poetry is an enactment of that kind of internalizing colloquy between word and being, and a healing of that rift. Mark Strand, in his poem Eating Poetry, I have been eating poetry, ink runs from the corners of my mouth, and he describes this delirium of the complete ingestion of the poem, and it's such an understandable kind of thing. And Ginsberg is describing a kind of internalization of that Ali, Ali, Lama, Lama, Sabachthani saxophone cry that of course is sacrificial and ritualistic and sacred in its way, meaning, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Which is a kind of cry of the beats that is universal, the sense of being forsaken by society or redemptive systems or whatever they're going to create their own way to the holy, towards the divine, towards a spiritual and energized colloquy, towards a experience of the real. But Ginsberg's movement always towards song, and I don't just mean song la-di-da, I mean song in the presence of the physical, sound, penetrative, redeeming word that is internalized as words you eat. So Ali, Ali, Lama, Lama, Sabachthani cry becomes our beat expression towards beatitude. And that is what Ginsberg does his entire life, because if you were lucky enough to see him in the 70s or 80s or early 90s, you're amazed by how much of the poetics isn't just a poetry reading of words. It's things breaking into song and sometimes chanting, and would have the whole audience chanting, or break into Blake, which was always inspirational to him and a sort of source of spiritual vision. And he'd do something like, piping down the valleys wild, piping songs of pleasant glee, on a cloud I saw a child, and he laughing said to me, Piper, pipe a song about a lamb, and has a terrible voice, but Ginsberg didn't have this great voice. But what he did have is an inner sincerity that would draw the audience into this amazing beat and beatitude moment of binding with the verse through song. Next time I'll talk about some of the deliciously disturbing parts of Howl and the 1956 attempt to ban the book. After that, I will move on in another video to female beat poets and then do something on William Burroughs. I'll leave you with a short that I did on Burroughs. Have a terrific day.
Sun's going down like a big bald head, disappearing behind the boulevard. It's Sharky's night. Yeah, it's Sharky's night tonight. And the manager says, Sharky, he's not at his desk right now. Should I take a message? And Sharky says, hey, Kamasabe, long time no see. He says, hey, sport, you connect the dots, you pick up the pieces. He says, you know, I can see two tiny pictures of myself, and there's one in each of your eyes.